Hello, once again I am Sydney and I am a servant of the Almighty God. This is the second part of dealing with why evolutionists are all wrong. What they got so wrong. But I must always start these episodes with reminding us that we are always in the presence of the living God. So we're not talking, we shouldn't be focused on people who lived hundreds of thousands of years ago and how they were pious and God-fearing. We have to recognize that we are always in the presence of the living God. I am also the author of several books, including Humanity's Inflection Point and my latest, this one you have to get. This is the ESIS, Life's Logic module. In this episode, the second part of dealing and speaking about why evolutionists got this thing completely wrong is I have to do a little analogy here. Let's say we take a completely self-driving vehicle. So I'm talking about level 5 autonomous driving. This vehicle, you call it, there is no interaction with a human being. The car takes the call, it comes. You have to go to the car and validate somehow. Then it opens the door, you get in, and the car takes you where you want to go. It obeys the traffic laws, it does everything. It takes you there safely. And if you call it, it'll take you back home. If you take that car, and I'm using, in parallel to what our best and brightest researchers do today, if you take that vehicle and you give it to them to dissect it, they would tear it apart. They would recognize and be able to decipher every polymer that's used. They would be able to look at every alloy, all the systems. They'd look at the hydraulics, they would look at the steering, the braking, the transmission, the way we use gears. They would be able to look at all of this. And at the end, using this analogy to what is done currently, they would tell you, right, they would have it published that that vehicle has those capabilities and it's able to do everything it does because of these polymers, because of the relationships between all these elements. So you have the transmission, you have these nice tires with whatever beautiful, rubber compounds they use, and they have these special alloys to make it light and all the beautiful things. They will talk about all the interactions. Right? They would, even the suspension and, like I said, the braking and steering and even the music system and the fact that it can take you there safely and all that stuff. They will do all of that, dissect everything, tell you just about everything about the composition of that. And you know what they would miss? What they would miss is probably the most important piece. The most important piece. You see, before we had these autonomous vehicles, we were the intelligent system. We sat in the car, we turned the key, we pressed, we said, give me some more driving force, whether from an internal combustion engine or from a battery. We did that. We were the intelligence. Now, we embed that intelligence, but that intelligence, it's not tangible. You cannot see that intelligence. So anyone who is unaware of that would then make the assumption and likely publish that the association of this wonderful tires and this transmission, and just by hooking all these things together and having that oil in the engine that it starts, they may even use things like division of labor, collaboration, and specialization. And they would tell you that all these things came about randomly. Imagine that. Specialization, collaboration, division of labor. You can Google it, you can look at any AI engine and they'll tell you these things came about as a result of random stuff. Collaboration, yes, came about randomly. Division of labor, specialization, and they work as one cohesive unit. Now, you see the parallels. We do all this research into living organisms. We look at plants, animals, we see right down, we look inside the brain, we see all these structures, we see all these processes driven by, we have these different chemicals, we have sensors throughout, and they would look at that in a car, in an autonomous vehicle, and they would say, well, yes, those things just came together, and they are driven, and all these activities are the result of these physical components. But we know better, right? We know that there is an intangible intelligence that is really the driver of everything. So when you make, just go over to the other side and you look at, we look at the plant. We do the dissection. We see all these wonderful processes. We can monitor these processes. But we never attribute any of that to intelligence. We just say, oh, this chemical. But when you think about it, there is an organ, something that produces the chemical, something that regulates the amount of the chemical. Then there has to be a sensor that detects that chemical and responds. So the sensory system has to be designed that way. That is all intelligence. Unfortunately, and this is a conundrum, our scientific methods require empirical data so that others can replicate and produce same results. For humans, right, we have this, the intelligence quotient, this IQ, and we kind of use that. But when you really think about it, we must have some sort of intelligence that we can attribute to these, not just organisms, but even processes. Because when you think about, things like digestion, right? Digestion, and we know this from if you're watching these, these investigation shows that digestion stops when someone dies. Now, if you think about it, the enzymes, there may still be residual enzyme if they are being produced dynamically. The enzymes may still be there, the food is still there. So we see there is an intelligence to this. And to go back even further, one of the things that, when they talk about, the collaboration and specialization and division of labor, they like to use over time. And I've discussed this extensively in my latest book. Over time would be the largest driver of extinction. Because, let's take this one step at a time. Think about our digestive system. Think about our reproductive system. So the theory is that we came from something, maybe from the ocean or whatever. But the very first occurrence of some form of life that exists on land that needs to reproduce by our current methods. If that method had to wait for thousands of years or hundreds of, millions of years over time, how would the first one reproduce? So this whole concept of over time is actually a method to guarantee extinction. Because if you don't have it when you need it, what we know currently from, as a software engineer, we know it just in time. You need it just in time. Your reproductive system, your respiratory system, even things like immunity, Those things are needed just in time. You can't develop that over thousands of years, because that is like saying, my great grandparents could not reproduce. How did I suddenly appear? So the very first one, those systems had to be perfectly designed. And those systems, it may sound kind of just a system. When you think of each of the components, the enzymes, all of these chemicals, all the sensors, all of these things have to be there. Because if they are not, you cannot have this system that operates, that is essential. As a matter of fact, the absence of this is an existential threat to the existence of that species. So here we go with this whole thing of ignoring intelligence, and then we say, over time simply does not work. Many of these things are needed just in time. Okay, so this is the parallel that we see now. We do so much research, but we look at only the physical components. And it's somewhat taboo to relate that to intelligence. Like I said, if we look at a drone, and they dissect the drone and say, oh, the drone flies because of, they are ignoring one of the most important components, the intelligence, because the intelligence is intangible. It's not visible. You cannot put your hand around it, and we have no system in place currently to quantify it. There is nothing quantifiable. We cannot say this is greater than this, or there is nothing measurable. But that does not mean that it does not exist. We are all aware. It's like, I've talked a lot about like memory. We have no idea where and how, and I can tell you from software engineering, with encryption, it's very likely that data is stored in such a long encryption key, or the equivalent of, that it may never be decipherable by us, because then we would never need a lie detector. We would simply plug something in, get a judge's order, and we plug in, and we would replay everything in your memory. And remember, memory doesn't only contain vision. Memory contains input from all the senses. What you felt, what you tasted, what you smelled, what you saw. That's all in memory. This is why some people reacted in different ways with past pleasure or past traumatic events. So memory, just like intelligence, is intangible, and it's not something that we can research. But we have to be aware that our best and brightest are in fact omitting a very significant part in all their research. And it seems like there is a taboo to, attributing intelligence to anything, because it's the same, and I admitted in my book that yes, it comes from whence cometh, that's another one of my books, from whence cometh the intelligence. It had to come from somewhere. But what we've done, these current evolutionists, they choose to simply ignore the intelligence, which is a driver. Like I said, that autonomous vehicle, they would tear it apart and say it's because of these components. When we know it's that AI that we embed in it, that is really the driver. So when they look at the brain, and they look at the heart, and they look at all these things within us, they recognize they are processes, but they attribute those processes to the presence of certain components, not to what we know. There must be intelligence. That's the thesis. That's my last book, the thesis, life's logic module. That is where the intelligence comes from. That is what, as in the vehicle, it monitors all the senses. This is why sometimes we feel things and we're like, where did that come from? Because we have this subconscious, that subconscious intelligence that monitors and directs things like our autonomic processes. We don't control, things like immunity. the fact that, the way our blood, if we are cold, and they say that the blood will contract from your extremities in order to save your life. You may lose your hands and your legs. Well, that we do not control that. We see, as a matter of fact, this intelligence, when you listen to many of these evolutionists and these naturalists, you would think that plants are much more intelligent and much more capable than we are, because they show that plants adapt, and plants, like that classic In the Mind of Plants video, right? You can go on in the internet. I think it was just it's shown periodically on these TV channels, but it shows that plants react in very, very distinct ways to preserve themselves when faced with existential threats. So this is the thing. We see the adaptation, and I emphasize intelligent. There is no natural selection. These are all intelligent adaptation driven by intelligence, embedded, intrinsic intelligence, the ISIS. This is what all the current evolutionists, and even our best and brightest scientists, they all ignore that intelligence. And this is what I have been inspired to bring out, and this will bring a change, because unlike religions that separate people and talk based on different prophets, science, technology, medicine, it brings us all together. There is no discrimination based on technology, medicine. It's something, and this is the knowledge. This is the knowledge that will bring us all together. Not these, unfortunately, these religions that pick a prophet, but the knowledge that we were all created and all derived from these reusable pieces based on intelligent design. So once again, I want to thank you for taking the time to review this. And I always say this is not a coincidence that you encountered this. This was actually a path that you chose some time ago that led you down to this information. And so it's just the beginning. Now you know you can be another wonderful branch on this tree to get this information out, so that we can all participate in the world that joins all people together. So again, I want to thank you, and until next time, may God bless us all. Thanks again.